Time doesn't erase murder. It just hides it better. They said the case was closed. They said no one was watching. But someone always is. This is Santana True Crime.
Welcome to Santana True Crime. Tonight we are going to talk about the case that started this podcast, and that is the case of Virginia Olson. Virginia was murdered almost 50 years or over 50 years to this day. It would have been April 15th when she was murdered, but still close enough. When this book came out, an interesting thing happened. We actually started to learn more information. People started to come forward and provide us details about the case. And just yesterday, we were able to talk to Thomas Guthrie, who is the 14-year-old. He was one of the boys that found Virginia's body. So we wanted to take this opportunity to provide you some additional details that we learned. With me today is my co-author, the professor, Dr. Brian Santana. Brian, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good to be here. It says sad anniversary, 53 years tomorrow, as you said, with Virginia Olson's murder. But it's good to have
you. That's been that long too.
53 years is crazy. Yeah, it feels like we're almost moving into the realm of historical cases. I was thinking about this just the other day, and when we started working on this book, like you said, it was like part of the rationale was we imagined this book would be something that would start an actual conversation that stalled. At the time our book came out, there had not been a single article published in over 25 years outside of the Blue Banner. So anyone for Blue Banner watching, shout out to you guys for keeping the story going over the years. But 25 years. And so, and like you said, one of the amazing things to me is that over a year since the book came out, January 2025, when the book came out, we know significantly more about the case now than when we started. And there's this moment for me, I don't know if you feel this way, but there's this moment sometimes when people ask for the book and I give them the book, and we have so much information that's good in the book if you're not familiar with the case, and so many new discoveries we made. But I also always want to give this caveat. Yeah, but we know so much more now than when this book came out. And let me tell you about all this other stuff we know.
Yeah, and I think a part of that is this case did not get hardly any attention, like you were saying. And I mean, we don't have big names. This isn't a huge show, but just the amount of people that care about Virginia and care about this case have been able to share some details with us that, I mean, the details we learned from Tom, I thought were game-changing in a way, especially when we look at the solvability factor of this case, which we'll get into in a little bit.
Yeah, it makes I had become quite pessimistic that it was even possible for this case to have like a route to being officially closed, short of just kind of convincing the Asheville Police Department to close it based on a preponderance of evidence that they have right now against the individuals we think were responsible. But in light of our conversation yesterday, I'm feeling a little bit, the loss of the semen sample was something that's always bothered me in this case and was a big question mark, but I'm seeing other possibilities for potential DNA now that I did not see just days ago.
Well, let's step back for a second, just in case people are not familiar with this case. Can you give me a quick rundown of who Virginia was and what happened on April 15th, 1973?
Sure. So I'm going to keep this brief. And if you want more details about Virginia Olson's life, we interviewed about 30 of her friends from high school and college. So please take a read in the book, A Murder on Campus. But Virginia Olson was a sophomore at UNC-A, finishing her second year. She was a recently declared drama major. There she is. And that picture, by the way, is courtesy of Mr. Alex Wu and Ken Sargent. So we've had some other groups doing some shows. I think it's 828 now. They borrowed some of our pictures and miscredited them. I do want to just point out for the record, Ken Sargent and Alex Wu are the people who kind of gave us those images for the book.
Borrowed is a nice way.
Not UNC-Asheville. That's an amazing picture of her too. But this is so Virginia Olson was finishing her second year. She was about a month shy of finishing her second year. She was a drama major in Asheville. She had come to Asheville from Fairfax County, Virginia, from McLean High School. Many of her closest friends were still there. Her father had been transferred to North Carolina through the Department of Agriculture and was working in a town about 3 hours from Asheville. And so she wanted to be closer to her family. She was, at the time of her death, she was finishing the semester. She was a new drama major. She had been cast in some of her first major roles. She was contemplating a transfer, which a lot of people do not know. That was a new detail we revealed in the book. She was considering transferring to UNC Greensboro, which would be closer to her family. And she was really at a crossroads in her life. She had a serious, I don't know if boyfriend is the right term, but she had a guy in Jeff Doyle, who we've spoken to, who was, she was seeing very seriously. She had some other very close friends as well at UNC-Asheville, and was really at the moment of just trying to figure out what came next. And on April 15th, 1973, she was preparing for a Spanish exam, and she had just come off of spring break, had gone back to McLean, Virginia, and had a really good time with Jeff Doyle and some of her friends back there. She had arrived back on a bus 2 days before, and she gets back into town, and her parents are passing through. And so that was a pleasant surprise, because she had spent spring break with her friends in Virginia and not with her family, but her family was en route to Missouri, I believe, for a kind of church conference. And she spent Friday the 13th with them, and they left, and she was studying that weekend. She spoke to some friends that day, was heading towards the botanical gardens before lunch, and she was going to do some studying. And that's really where the story begins. We have, from the time she goes into the botanical gardens, we have a few people. We have some witnesses that were her classmates that observed her walking in and talked to her before. We have a man named Ray Honeycutt, who is listening to a NASCAR race on the radio, who observes her walking into the botanical gardens. This was about 12:15. We have an individual named Gerald Eccles, who was the president of the local Audubon Society, who was out bird watching that day, who is going to spot her next. And this is around 12:30, 12:45, if memory serves me correct. And he is going to make his way back through. He's walking his dog, and he comes back through, and when he sees her the first time, she is conversing with a man near the rocks in the area across Weaver Boulevard, adjacent to the botanical gardens. He is close enough at the time he sees her to describe the clothing and the facial hair and other things of the man, the hairstyle. And when he comes back through 30 minutes later, she's not there. He described seeing a kind of flapping of something in the wind, which we now associate as like her books. And sometime between when he initially saw her with this man and when he came back through, so about a 30-minute window, she's presumably murdered. And about 3:30 that afternoon, two boys, one from Asheville High School, and with Joseph O'Kelly, and then one from then Thomas Guthrie, the 14-year-old boy from South French Broad School, are going to make their way through roast with some friends, and they make their way back down through the trail that intersects where Virginia Olson previously was, and they discovered her bound, and there is some blood. She is obviously deceased at that point, and that is what's going to kind of kickstart the investigation that takes more twists and turns than we can kind of describe here over the next 53 years.
Well, let's talk about this, because when we were doing our research, we had articles and we had the ME's reports, the search warrant, other public documents that we could get our hands on. But we didn't have an interview with Tom Guthrie.
Yes, that's correct. So we had some people who were students at the time, who were kind of adjacent to the gardens when this happened, who remembered the atmosphere on campus. We had the other records, we had the news media coverage, but we did not have the firsthand direct evidence of the person who discovered Virginia Olson's body. And you know, for people that are listening right now, I want to emphasize too that what ends up happening when you're researching these cases, you might have your timeline for writing or for publication, but other people's lives are often a lot more complicated than that. Some people we just were not able to find. There were some individuals who did not want to talk initially, but who subsequently came forward and decided they wanted to talk later after the book was out. There are so many different reasons. And one of the things I think you have to learn when you're working in true crime is that you're dealing with a lot of different people, a lot of different types of sources, lots of different kinds of motivations and feelings about talking to individuals rightly about their experiences and stories. And it's not anything that you can ever expect other people to do. No one owes anyone who's working in true crime anything. And so it is always a real pleasure and a privilege when people trust you enough to share their stories, but it's not automatic. In the case of Thomas Guthrie, there were a lot of different, I think, reasons why our paths did not cross before this, but I'm grateful that he reached out to us just the other day.
Yeah, and I remember trying to contact him via social media, and I don't know if that was a proper account or what, but regardless, it's just nice to be able to actually talk to him and hear his firsthand account of what happened that day. And some of the details
Yeah.
that he talked about, like, for example, let's start off with the area. So he described, or it was described in a lot of publications as being like a lover's lane area, right?
Yes, and in fact, let me I can tell you that the Citizen Times in their coverage of this, they actually interviewed one of the police officers on the scene who was quoted as saying, and this is not even much of a paraphrase, this is almost a direct quote, that the area was a known like hangout for like winos and a lover's lane. And I had always assumed that was true in the sense that, okay, so a beat cop who's familiar with the area, he tells a reporter that. Presumably, he's had other experiences that that's based on. And I was really surprised by what Thomas Guthrie told us.
Right. I mean, he actually laughed it off and said that he was like, what liquor stores are around there? You can't even buy wine around that area. And he
Yeah.
described it as more of a secluded area that people that, like him and his friends, that were had an intimate knowledge
Yeah.
of those trails would go. But this is not an area that a lot of people would travel to, even though you do have the botanical gardens
Mhm.
about 100 yards away from that area.
Sure. Yeah. No, I think that that makes a big difference because even when we talked about like contamination of the crime scene, it's a little bit different if you're imagining this is an area that is highly trafficked, that the kids are always coming and going. If it's an area frequented by winos, you can imagine cigarette butts or beer bottles or, all sorts of other things that people will kind of drop or leave around when they're drunk, right? And it made it and it made a and I also thought that maybe there was some credibility to the idea of a lover's lane only because when we talked about the Mary Burdett case in the book, which we've also done a podcast episode about, that when the murder in that case takes Mary Burdett out to that area, presumably I was assuming that he took her there because his feet from where Olson was found, like because it was a lover's lane. But Thomas Guthrie really discredited that. And that was really eye-opening because it changes exactly how I think you think about the contamination of this crime scene. Because if it's an area that's very secluded that not many people are usually going to, then a lot of the contamination is what's going to happen from the foot traffic and a lot of the immediate kind of crime scene chaos that happens in this case.
Yeah, and we'll get to that in detail, but let's start out with what he actually I wanted to talk about first what he actually saw.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest points that he made or that stuck out to me was first of all, when they ran across her, they believed that she was dead. He said he did not touch her because obviously he was scared. But he described
Hmm.
that her pants were actually pulled up
Yeah.
and it looked like they were unbuttoned, but we believe that her pants were down because she was assaulted.
And there's also some confusion. Yeah, because so that was the inference. Because when we talk about the medical examiner's report, which we publish in the book, um, the medical examiner is talking a lot about the sexual assault and the way her clothes are torn, right? The medical examiner says that the bindings had described some of the rips and tears in the actual kind of top that she was wearing. And so because of that, and because there is an emphasis and it's later released that they believe she was raped and sexually assaulted, they recovered semen from the vaginal canal during the autopsy. That, because of that, we were assuming that her clothes were mostly in tatters, even though it wasn't directly said. But
Right. Well, the
it
ME's report also described having abrasions on her knees and
right,
elbows, which would lead
your
me to believe.
pants were
But
down.
so
Right, right, yeah.
that's a
So
huge detail. So we know that she
yeah,
was moved from the rock, or
yes,
she was coerced from the rock to where she was found. And we know that she lost a lot of blood. He described not seeing a lot of blood. He
that's what
believed that
surprised me.
maybe it was a bunch of internal bleeding, but that's not going to be the case when you're stabbed in the heart. Your heart is going to be pumping out blood, which is where she was stabbed first, and then her neck was later sliced. So when we go back and think about from a crime
Mhm.
scene management point of view,
Yeah.
I believe that there's probably an alternate crime scene
Uh-huh.
um, where she was actually murdered. After
I do too.
hearing what he was saying, I do not believe that she was murdered there. I believe it was some point between that rock and where she was found. And for whatever reason,
Mhm.
the suspects believe that they should put her pants back on. And
Or,
I don't know
or
why they did that.
well, here's the thing. I've given this some thought because one of the things that was difficult in trying to figure out exactly the sequence of events. Now we know that the very deep slash that is across her trachea on her throat, which I mean, not to be too graphic, but him describing what he saw, he described it as a very significant gash that went all the way around, which was larger than I was imagining with the medical examiner's description. But either way, we know we feel pretty confident that was a post-mortem wound, right? Because there was no blood
Right.
emanating from that. So that's a post-mortem wound. I believe the diameter of the actual knife wound, the medical examiner noted it was about an inch. So that's why they thought it was like a pocket knife. And there's one wound that strikes her directly in the heart, right? And so if that's the case, he had estimated about 3 liters of blood. Um, were lost, is what his estimation says in the report. That's not me. And so the question I always had was, if there's 3 liters of blood lost and we have a wound that's the size of about an inch, that would be significant spray, right? And why that detail matters is because one of the questions we had was the individual who's responsible. This crime scene is quickly going to become chaotic. There's close to 100 people less than 100 yards away in the botanical gardens. And it seemed, given that there's no restrooms right around there or washing areas, it seemed like it would be unlikely that someone would avoid getting a significant amount of blood on them. And there was a high probability that someone might have seen them, right? That was at least a question we had, I think, early on. But hearing that there was blood, he did say that. He said there was blood, but it wasn't like he said there certainly wasn't 3 liters of blood. It didn't look like 3 liters. It makes me wonder now exactly where the crime happened. It also makes me wonder about the actual sequence of the crime itself. So we know the postmortem wound, we know the murder, but the pants were pulled up. Does this mean if there were two individuals, like I think there probably were, that were tied to this? It makes me wonder if we were thinking about Gore and Rivas, if Gore is a more active participant in this, or there's a more active participation than we imagine, in the sense that, is it possible that there was a rape and then the murder happened kind of after the fact? Um, or was this a rape that occurred after the murder? I'm not really sure. I think it makes a difference in how you think about the person responsible, but I'm not really sure of that exact sequence. Have you given that more thought since last night?
I think that Gore's involvement, or how much involvement he had, I do think about that, and I wonder if he just kind of stood back and encouraged John to do everything, and he just watched out for people, or at least that was my initial point of view. But if it is more remote,
Mhm.
then maybe that's why there wasn't that fear of getting caught. And
Right.
maybe they felt comfortable
Yeah.
being in that, they took her off the rocks to a more uh, enclosed area. I mean, I've got a picture right here of this is one of the trails in that area, and this is in April, keep in mind.
Right. Yeah.
So
This is from the same
trees
year. This.
are fully bloomed. And so the leaves and the cover, that's going to give you some protection from being seen by people. So I do think that within that 30 to 45-minute window, which we've established she was murdered, I don't think that it was as quick as we were led to believe. I think
Mhm.
it makes more sense that maybe John went over and talked with her first,
Yeah.
and then it escalated from there to the point that he likely did either rape her somewhere close to that rock, and I'm guessing that escalated to the murder.
Yeah.
Um, but that's something that is going to be really hard to find out, you know?
And it does make me wonder, though. Yeah, if it seemed like, at least when we talked to the current investigators very early on in this book, they seemed very confident of where the murder took place. But I don't know how you can be that confident given all the different variables that we know now. Like,
Well,
looking
yeah,
back.
let's talk about that. First, I want to
So,
talk about what they did
mhm.
after seeing her body. So we knew that the police were called shortly after that. We knew that
Yes.
they left to call the police or to get help, essentially.
Yep.
What we did not know is they went to the parking lot to try to flag someone down, and they
And we're,
ended up
yeah.
flagging down a nurse,
And
an
but
off-duty
before
nurse.
that, they were banging on he said they banged on the windows of a few cars trying to get people to help them, and the first 2 people, he said, just, like, turned them down and wouldn't even
Right.
kind of, like, acknowledge them. I didn't know that detail. That was never reported, and we didn't see that in any of the documents.
Yeah, and I mean, that sounds like something from a movie where you've got 2 high school kids that are
Right.
banging on doors, yelling about how some girl has been murdered in the woods, and people are just fleeing, and luckily, a nurse that they flagged down ended up going back with them to the body, and Tom said that she actually checked for a pulse,
Yes.
but, I mean, we know that, with a slit throat and the obvious injuries to her chest, she's going to be dead. But anyway, she does check for a pulse. She determines that, yes, there's nothing that they can do. And then I believe he had a question about whether she removed her bindings.
Yes, there was that. We know the bindings were removed at the scene. The officers, I had always worked under the assumption that the officers who arrived were the ones who, removed them. um, a relative of John, I don't think he would mind me saying this, but a relative of John Sylvie, who was the first detective sergeant who arrived from the Asheville police, so, or sergeant detective, I'm sorry, who arrived from the Asheville police. He had always said that the scene was a total mess by the time he actually arrived there. So, and that was the first beat cops that were already kind of there. And I'd assumed they had removed the bindings, which they might have, but we also have this other possibility we hadn't considered. So this nurse that Thomas Guthrie runs into, that he brings back, that checks for the pulse, like you mentioned, she apparently was a nurse at Mission Memorial Hospital. This detail has never been reported before. We do not know this person's identity. He never found out who this was. If you know, if anyone's listening who knows of anyone who worked at Mission Memorial Hospital, this was, I'm sure, a story that would have gotten around that time. They were the person there. Mission Memorial was also the hospital that was used for the autopsy by the North Carolina Medical Examiner for Virginia Olson too. So that's another kind of interesting fact about this case. But um, But this nurse comes back to the scene that's never been identified, and that's a detail that's completely new. It's never been reported, and is there. And he mentioned also possibly her. He seemed to remember her doing something maybe to like cover her face, I think is what he said. So they were.
Yes.
Mhm.
Here's another detail that I think is we knew, but we didn't know how extreme it was. And
Yes.
that is that after they left and the police are called, word got around about the body. And so the students were just flooding into that area.
Yes.
And we had asked him, like, because I've seen pictures and we actually put them in our book, and you can see people kind of milling around. But he described people going essentially right up to the body. He described it being like rubberneckers on Interstate 40, where people
Yeah.
want to see a wreck. It's the same kind of fascination where people wanted to see a dead body, and they're coming, and the police are not stopping them. And you've got to remember, it is a vital crime scene between where her body is and where that rock is. There
Yes.
could have been a knife. He actually described that too. He made the point, Tom did.
It was a great point,
Saying,
by the way.
I could see someone picking up a knife and being like, "Oh, look, a pocket knife," and taking it home with them.
That's 100% right.
Right.
Yeah.
And that is something that is an absolute possibility, and just makes this case so much harder when we think about. I know that we cannot apply 2026 standards
Right.
to 1973 standards in police work. We talked about that before. We wrote about it in the book, how this is 1973 is when formal police standards started for the state. And so you don't have that formal training like you do today, where you've got a checklist of everything you're supposed to do at a major crime, to include
Mhm.
setting up crime scene security, which again is vital.
Yes. And he said that number. So we knew, and we say in the book that we described the scene as chaotic. In fact, there are some of Olson's friends were aware that she was missing when they heard someone was injured, and they actually went to the crime scene, and that's part of how she is identified. We understood all of that. What we didn't understand, like you mentioned, was just the sheer number of students who were coming to the crime scene. I have my notes in front of me that I took from our long telephone conversation with Tom Guthrie last night. And he estimated that there were 2 to 3 dozen college students that were walking around in close proximity to the body. So we're talking 24 to 36 people. Now we think about the 2 boys who, no fault of their own, have made their way through the crime scene. Let's take the higher end of that and say 30. Then we have 38. Then we have the nurse that's there. We have 39. That's a lot. And then we have the individual who was talking with Olson, right, at the Rock, 40.
Right.
If we add in potentially James Gore, we have 41. If we add in Gerald Eccles, who was close enough to describe the individual talking to Olson, we have 42. We also have the dog that's with Gerald Eccles. That's another kind of presence there. Like, we're getting into numbers of just what we know right now in 2026 that we can be confident there's close to 50 people, like within like 30 minutes of her body being found. And then the first officers are showing up. There's 2 or 3 of them. There's the ambulances. And then John Sylvie arrives. We're getting close to 60 people, and this is not under control yet.
And we also know that they did not take their time at that crime scene. They actually removed her body fairly quickly. I believe it was under something like within 30 minutes from being there.
So from the time they discover her to the time that the John McLeod, who's performing the autopsy, starts his recording to kind of narrate through his notes at the autopsy, we're talking about within like 3 hours. And so it's like it's fast. It's a very fast kind of thing that happens.
Yeah, so they're loading her up very quickly. Another strange detail that
Well, can we talk about just for a second? Can
Go
we
ahead.
talk about why all this matters? So we've we've kind of made this point many times before, and we talked about the importance of preserving crime scene. But In
Well,
2026, where do you think this leaves us right now with that detail that we now know with the sheer number of people that were there and people that were rubbernecking, which means they're kind of kicking around, maybe picking things up, all of that. Like we
I'm going
know
to give
that
some good news first.
let's get okay. Good news first.
Good news is that before we know that the semen sample has been lost, even though the Asheville Police Department won't admit it. They don't have it.
It's gone. It's so
It's
gone
gone.
that it's not even. They won't even talk about that the semen sample was even taken. When, by the way, if you read the book Murder on Campus, look at the medical examiner's report. You will see him describing the process of plating the semen, of looking at it under a microscope and seeing active sperm and using how active the sperm are to date when the assault occurred. So we have a good sample that's taken by 73 standards.
Yeah.
Where did that
So-
go? It's gone. It's gone.
Right. It's gone. That would have been the absolute best thing to have right now, because we can't say, no one can make an argument of, it's not like touch DNA where you can
Right.
say, oh, well, it got there some other way. It's semen. Unless you're going to make an argument saying that that was consensual. The next thing that we were really keen on was the bindings.
Yeah.
But we know that they were removed at the scene. They were untied.
Right.
I wonder if
It
they
was-
even have them at this point.
I'm very curious about that too. I'm going to be generous and say that they have them, even though I have no reason to be that way. Because if you want to be generous about, if you want to know how much faith you should have in bindings, talk to our good friend Mark Pinsky about the Nancy Morgan case and how the police officers were. I don't mean to laugh at this, but it's not funny. But they forgot where they put the bindings, and one of them was driving around in the trunk of his car for like weeks. And like that's like
But these
that's kind
type of things happen.
Yeah.
I had John Hoyle on
Mhm.
to talk about Rhonda Henson, and he was
Yeah.
telling me how they lost the trunk lid in the case.
Well,
So she was shot through the trunk lid and it went through the seat. And at some point, a private investigator wanted to test it, and the department allowed it, and they
forgot
lost it.
he forgot to give it back. It's in the scrapyard somewhere.
Yeah, and
It's what did he do with it? Yeah. Never mind.
it's
Let's
just
not get
those
sidetracked on
type
that.
of
Yeah.
things, unfortunately, were quite common around that time. But I hope that they have the pants, and they probably weren't stored properly. I'll take the pessimistic side on this,
Okay,
but
let's do the pessimistic side.
it would be another opportunity that we know that the suspect pulled those pants up.
Yep.
And so there should be DNA on that. And
And
the
if she
other
was,
thing
yeah. Mhm.
that's good news that I don't think is talked about it, but I heard from a reliable source that Othram has been able to develop a technology to use mixed DNA now.
That's
And
amazing.
that has been a huge issue with a lot of these cold cases, to include cases like John Benet Ramsey,
Yeah.
where they've got DNA, but they know it's mixed, or they believe it's mixed. And if that is an issue in this case, maybe there's a possibility for additional testing, and maybe we will be able to conclusively prove that John Rivas Jr. and James Gore are responsible for this.
In fact, I'm going to send an email tomorrow. They're not going to probably respond back to it, but I'm going to send an email to Captain Silverman and Kevin Taylor, who oversee this case, and just kind of point out this development with Othram and encourage them, rather than sending it to North Carolina SBI lab. We love all of you at the SBI. You guys are doing amazing work, but let's send it to a private lab. If they're intent on doing DNA testing, at this point in time, with at 53 years old, with the materials by no one's fault being improperly stored, there's no way. And let me tell you this. And this is how I know I have real confidence that they're going to need really advanced technology. I'm researching a case right now, the Elizabeth Espy case. And one of the things I noticed was when agents sent away as recently as, there we go. So I have a recent book deal to bring this to the market from the History Press. Thank you all for acquiring this book. It's going to be a really good one. But this is related. One of the things that blew my mind was that the materials in that case and the detectives in that case, unlike the one in this one, for the most part, it did really, really good work. And one of the things that they stored it according to just standards that would have been appropriate at the time, but the materials naturally degraded so much that when they sent off a piece of Elizabeth Espy's top that had blood on it, the FBI, this is the FBI crime lab, had reported back that they said the DNA was so degraded they couldn't even detect Espy's own DNA in what you could visibly see was blood. And so, and that case happened April 1973, days apart from this one. And so because of that, since that's the kind of vantage point I'm using, I'm like, I believe that they're going to need the best quality lab they can get. I think these materials are likely degrade enough. Even all those, when Kevin Taylor goes on these shows, including the WB TV special, and they say that they have tons of evidence and materials and it's safe to say they have DNA. Well, like, I think you're going to need better technology to be able to really do something with that DNA than what we're probably going to get at most state labs. And that's no knock on the SBI or anyone else.
Yeah, I believe Othram needs 20 cells.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And I think even in that case, there's a possibility that that might not exist in this case. But they do say they have DNA. I'm not really sure what they have because it's not the semen sample. And if it is mixed DNA, then there's potentially a shot here. And I hope they take it if they do, because I feel like with some of the people over there, if you're getting paid $1 million salary or $500,000 salary, like send this off to the lab. Let's get some real tests in there. So, by the way, this is Asheville Watchdog, phenomenal journalists over there, retired people from Dateline and other major kind of New York Times news networks. They did some really interesting work about the some of the overtime with the Asheville Police Department in one of their most recent issues. I'd encourage everybody to take a look if they want to. But
I can't blame them though.
Oh, I don't blame
these
either,
guys
yeah.
are working overtime. They've earned it.
Don't blame you. Yeah. But let's send those materials
over there.
Yeah, let's send the materials off to a real lab. So
I'm all for that.
Let's not send it off to the upteenth time just for some more testing to tell us we have nothing there. So
I wanted to bring attention to another detail that Tom shared with us that is so odd, but it makes me want to dig into this even more. That he said that there is an Irish setter looking dog, may have been some type of lab,
red or brown dog,
red or brown dog, that was close to Virginia's body
within 20 feet. Yeah.
Yes. And go ahead.
This dog was there when they found her body. It was not like a stray like dog that looked like it would have been malnourished or anything. This is like someone's dog, right?
Right.
It's within 20 feet of her body. When they leave to go seek help, the banging on the doors, the finding the nurse eventually, the dog follows them down. And correct me if I'm wrong, I believe he told us when they went back to her body with the nurse, the dog came back with them.
Yeah. And we know that Gerald Eccles had a dog with him, but you actually reached out to a family member of his, and we've confirmed that this is not that dog.
Yeah, Gerald Eccles had a dog named Cricket, who was a miniature poodle, just for the record. And so we are attempting to leave no stone unturned in this case. I was interested in this detail. Gerald Eccles, by all accounts, is a great guy. Like, this is not about him. I was just curious, where did this dog come from? And because we knew that we had an individual who, by his own admission, was close enough to describe the people, Virginia Olson, and a man she was talking to. So I was curious about where this dog came from, and that's another mystery in this case. It's a mystery we didn't even know existed because it's another detail that hasn't been there. I keep wondering what happened to this nurse, what happened to this dog. The dog comes back with them, the nurse comes back with them. They're all kind of walking around touching the body. 36 students come up, there's a dog running around, there's all, like, that's a crazy crime scene, right?
Oh, it is. Right.
Who knows what the dog was also do? Was a dog kind of like the dog was looking there 20 feet away, and there was a lot going on, granted, but Guthrie didn't recall anyone ever like calling for the dog and coming up and taking the dog. by his recollection. So
Yeah, which makes me believe maybe this is just a random dog that got away from his owner, or did John Rivas have a dog? Did
that's
James Gore have a
did James
dog?
Gore have a dog? Did John Reeves have a dog? I mean, let's take a moment and give the disclaimer that this is pure speculation, that we're just speculating live. This is how Cameron and I talk, by the way, when we are kind of talking about this case. Let's speculate for just a moment. John Rivas is in a panic. We know that from Judy Needle after the crime. His hands are shaking. He's telling her to pray with him. He's clearly agitated. Like, that's just a fact.
And he's about 1.5 miles from the
Yes.
body.
Yes, and he didn't have a driver's license, and he had to walk everywhere. So, so it's a fact that he's agitated. If in the event he did have a dog, we could imagine, and if this murder wasn't fully planned out as an actual murder, and by one of the investigator who spoke to us, um, had passed along that Gore essentially knew that Rivas was going to sexually assault Virginia Olson, but he claimed that he did not anticipate or know that she was going to get killed. So let's just assume that's truthful. And I'm deeply skeptical of that, by the way. But let's just assume for a second that that's truthful. In that event, maybe that would explain some of John Revis's panic. He leaves. If he happened in the hypothetical, he had a dog with him. The dog's there. He runs off. The boys come up a short time later. I don't know if that makes much sense, because if the dog's following them around, why wouldn't it have followed its owner when he left? So, like, I'm
Right.
not saying it's a great theory. I'm just trying to brainstorm. It's so hard to have any vantage point to even know. And when I was exploring the line with Gerald Eccles, it was only because there were media coverage at the time that reported that Eccles liked to go out on these nature walks with a dog. And someone from his family confirmed to me directly that he was, quote, never without his dog on these walks. And so I thought, okay, we know someone is near the crime scene. We know someone has a dog on the day that he's near the crime scene. Is this the same dog? No, it is not. Then whose dog is it? I don't know. And does this detail even matter? I'm not sure. I think it matters a little bit for contamination of the crime scene, but
Right. Yeah, and I'll tell you something that we kind of glossed over that I wanted to point out, that we put the search warrant in our book, and the search warrant, part of it talks about how James Gore pointed out a girl to John Rivas, and he claims that he was in the botanical gardens when that happened. And that was another good thing about talking to Tom, is he's like, no, there's no way in hell that you would be able to see her from the botanical gardens. And so that kind of gave us another confirmation of what Charles Chambers, who is the SBI agent that wrote the search warrant, like, that confirmed it to me.
Yeah, and in fact, it confirmed, Charles Chambers' logic, because he literally says that where he claimed to be, it wouldn't be possible to see to see Virginia Olson, and they would have had to be closer. And Thomas Guthrie confirmed that was true. So I think, based on both of those pieces of evidence, we can be reasonably sure that Gore and Rivas, by their own admission and their lie, right, in this, they're really close to Virginia Olson around the time she's murdered.
Oh, absolutely.
And so I think, suppose someone is skeptical of even this, and the Asheville police allegedly are skeptical, which, by the way, I don't mind saying this on record now. It's been a year already. I don't even believe their skepticism. I think they know 100% who's responsible for this. And I think that they pretend like they are skeptical of it, because I think that there's just far too many embarrassing details that pop up in this case to actually want them to revisit it. But, I think that even if you are skeptical that Rivas and Gore are responsible, our timeline, by the way, is the same timeline the Asheville police is working under. And by the way, if you watch the WBTV special, one of the things you'll notice that the host, was it John Laertris, says in the actual documentary, he says, the Asheville police and the Santana brothers both agree on the timeline. So we have the same timeline. And if we're both assuming this timeline is accurate, And that's what we're basing all of our conclusions on. If Rivas and Gore are not responsible, you're talking about this very short window where we know these two individuals who both have both mental health issues in all different kinds of ways and are united by what one investigator called a kind of this like strange sexual fetishes that they shared. They happen to be near her, but and in fact, Gore points her out to Rivas, but they don't do anything. And then some other random person that we don't know about just decides to blitz attack her and rape her in an
And
even shorter
is
amount
able
of
to
time.
get out of the area without being seen.
Yeah. And that Rivas is so disturbed after all that for something that he had nothing to do with that he goes to Judy Needle's house and asks her to pray with him and is very agitated. That's the official narrative. And then also leaves a bit of a blood smear. So, like, I think if you're just thinking in terms of logic and probability, Occam's razor, maybe the simplest solution is that these guys are likely responsible. And
Right. I mean, this is not someone that climbed out of a tree after Rivas and Gore left and killed
yeah,
her and then magically escaped. I don't buy that.
no, I think it's so illogical. And one of the things like with the Thomas Guthrie statement confirming Charlie Chambers' observation, there are a lot of things that investigators get right. We talk about a lot of the problems with this investigation. There are a lot of things that investigators in this investigation did get right. And I think that you can have a contaminated crime scene. You can have sloppy, just weird things that happen. Thomas Guthrie, I'm not even gonna repeat the story here because I don't feel comfortable repeating it because it's just a gross story. But he makes some comments about some of the things that one of the detectives said to him when he was questioned after this. There's just things that are just like weird and gross and just like sloppy in terms of this investigation, but all those things can be true, and Gore and Rivas can both be guilty as hell, and there can still be compelling evidence against them that these same detectives also developed.
You know what's funny about this too, with talking with him? When I asked him about what was the rumors around town about who did it,
Yeah,
he immediately started out with the Highlands Hill hospital story,
yeah.
which is so funny because we know that right or shortly after uh, this murder, John Rivas ends up checking himself into mental hospitals.
And the other part of that rumor was that it was someone from a wealthy family who was protecting him.
Right,
So
which
what do we
is
know about John Rivas?
absolutely true.
He came from a wealthy family. He was educated at Cornell. He was educated at Sorbonne in Paris. He was in California and was an Emmy nominated documentary filmmaker. He was doing he came from a prominent family. He had stopped making films by the early 1960s because he was suffering from severe mental illness. He was in Asheville for treatment of mental illness. Um, and his psychiatrist, who's dead, also has died in the 70s, is also had affiliations with Highland and some of the other also the outpatient facilities around the area. So the likelihood that this guy who came from a wealthy family, um, who was in town for mental health treatment, who was at the murder scene, and who was agitated afterwards and smeared some blood, and whose family intervened
Well,
by
not just
hiring.
intervened, they got him the fuck out of town.
They got him out, right.
Like, they got him to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina,
Yes, and that
right
was
after
reported
the murder.
the detail about him going to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina was reported widely in newspapers at the time. A detail that we've learned about more recently is that a lawyer named Bruce Elmore, who was a very prominent and powerful lawyer in North Carolina, he was the first lawyer to ever win a $1 million civil judgment in North Carolina history. What we've heard and what I'm kind of currently, we're kind of one of the things we're looking into is, he's no longer alive, but he was supposedly retained to by John Reeves's family, and John Reeves skips town, and then we have next time he's going to pop up is when Will Anarino is going to discover that he's in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And
you know what's funny about all that time in between is that, and this is something that angered Tom's parents, is that Tom Guthrie, one of
yeah,
the boys, is that the newspaper had no problem putting his name and his address, a
right.
14-year-old's name, full
Crazy.
name, and full address, and where they went to school in the paper. When they did a search warrant on Revis's house, they did not put his name in there. Guess what
That
else happened? Magically,
right.
that search warrant disappeared.
And that's what's so crazy, because when you were saying earlier, it is one thing to say, well, by it's a different era, different standards. By the 1970s, they wouldn't. In the 1970s, they would have had no issue printing this. In fact, there were names that were printed, like one of the suspects from they looked into in Florida, that like when police were speculating and had far less information, much less served a search warrant, they printed the person's name. And they printed these poor kids, 14-year-old kid, prints his address, where he goes to school, where his dad works. Like you print all that stuff in the paper, but you're telling me that a search warrant that's actually been filed with the court, that's a public record in the 1970s, is a public record that the newspapers would have had access to. You don't want to report that person's even name? Like, that doesn't make sense to me. It only makes sense because think about this today. I moved from West Virginia recently. Even though the search warrant was not available, the Gretchen Fleming case, this Preston Pierce, this one of their main suspects, we only know he's the main suspects, but the FBI announced we served a search warrant at the residence of Preston Pierce. They didn't tell us any details about what they were getting or why they were there, but they announced the name of the person they served a search warrant on.
Right.
And the idea, and that's now. And so you think about that, what, in the 70s, they would have been much more secretive about a search warrant? Like, I don't think so.
Right. I think that was political pressure put on by the lawyer. And looking back at now, I think that search warrant was removed and destroyed, and the only copy that really exists is the one with the Asheville Police Department. And they never gave us any explanation, but I think that they had the Asheville Police Department make a copy and give it to us.
Yeah, we don't know the full story with that, but we're just thankful to have
Just
it.
ended up in my
And
email.
and anyone who buys the book will also own a copy of that. So that entire search warrant is fully unredacted too. John Revis's name, his address, the names of all the witnesses are in there, and a brief summation of what their kind of affidavit basically said that was the basis for the search warrant. All of that is there. The
Well,
paperwork when it was signed off at 10 p.m. at night,
right.
and all of that. Yeah.
And I think that that's what's important going forward with this case, is that we are preserving what we can, and we've
Yeah.
done that with the book. Like you're saying, with the search warrant, the ME's report, the timeline that the Asheville Police Department agrees upon is accurate. All of that's in the book. But the other important piece about this is that people continue to come forward and provide information. And we were able to learn a lot of information from last night. I'm
Yeah.
sure that there are other people that are listening that either knew Virginia or may have known James Gore or known John Revis Jr., and we would love, or were out there that day.
Yeah. Yeah.
And maybe it wasn't you, maybe it was your dad or mother that were out there that day. Either way, we would love to hear your stories and try to get some more information on this.
Absolutely. We know just that there were, if you happen to be one of those 36 people who was milling around the crime scene looking at Virginia Olson's body, no one looks at that. No one, it's not about, we're not speaking negatively of the people who participate in that. They were college kids. They were curious. There's something
Right.
going on. It's a rubbernecking thing. I go by a big accident at my car. I slow down my car and have a look and see what's going on. I totally get the curiosity. We would love to hear from you, because just like we've heard other details from Thomas Guthrie and others who were directly there, I think the more perspectives that we have preserved about this case, the better off we will be in solidifying a a better sense of what likely happened in this case, and particularly why we are kind of waiting around on whatever they're going to do or not do with the forensic evidence, because we can't control whether they send the materials to Othram. Our only opportunity really is human sources at this point, and we need people to continue to come forward. And we've had a lot of people come forward over the last year. It's blown my mind of how much better understanding there is about this case than before we started, you know?
Yeah, and we have, I'm sure there's a lot more information
Yeah.
that has not been reported on. And if people come forward, maybe that will be that tipping point where we can advance this to formally name the people responsible. And I think that, your book that you're working on, A Murder in Niceville,
Mhm.
the Deborah Elizabeth Espy story, I think that's a perfect example of, these cases happened both in 1973. It's not a lost cause.
Right.
These are young women that were murdered, and there's no statute of limitations on it.
Right.
So even though in the SB case as well, the suspect is deceased, and an interesting story how they got their DNA on that one. But it's the same thing with Virginia, is that I think that society needs to continue to prosecute, or not even prosecute, name the people are responsible,
Yeah.
just to not let their memories fade away. Virginia, the Olson case, it's not a well-known case,
Mhm.
but it's the only murder that's happened on the campus of UNC-Asheville. More people need to know about that.
Yes, and if we do have some people listening say, "No, it actually took place in the area adjacent to Botanical Gardens," part of the reason, I say this all the time, that we describe this as a murder on campus is, look at the actual death certificate that the county issued. Location of murder, UNCA campus is what you will find. So this
Well,
is
you
an
also
area that
find
was
the
this was
chancellor's house now on
well,
the
right, the
murder
chancellor's
scene.
house there, and the university owned the property. So
Right.
this is we're calling this campus. I'm not saying students had classes there, but this is campus. Um, and I think that, to your point, I think it's a good one, and I think like no one's ever going to be prosecuted for this. I think that's pretty safe to say. With especially with the individuals we think are very likely the people responsible for this, who are deceased. But I think by talking about this case and creating a coherent story of what happened, we are really kind of doing a service to just the fact that, we want to remind people that her life mattered. And we want to remind people that these things happen, and that, yes, life goes on for many people, but her life ended 53 years ago tomorrow. And, I look at when we were in Fairfax, Virginia, and talked to some people who knew her in high school and some people who were friends with her. One of the things I keep thinking about is so much of the way that I imagine her as these pictures, like you have, that were taken by some of her friends, not UNCA. And, I think about that today she would look like many of her friends. She would be, she would be an older woman, and she didn't have that opportunity like the rest of them did. And everything has moved on, but I think it's important for people to still assert that it's not okay what happened to her. And just because there were these quirks and things that develop and mistakes that were made in the investigation, it doesn't mean those things can't be righted as much as we're able to now. It's not a perfect solution. I'm not even saying it's justice necessarily, but I think a minimum that we can do is to try to say that her life mattered enough that we can do our best to try to understand what happened and assign some degree of responsibility for that, even if the person will never sit in a jail cell.
Absolutely. Well said. Well, let's end on a somewhat positive note, and that is that you've got a book that's coming out this summer. Do you want to tell us about it?
Yeah, I've got a delivery date for that coming up, and I've got a deal signed with this, and I've been working on this book very hard for a bit. And this is case I discovered while we were researching the Olson case, and this is with the History Press. It's called A Murder in Niceville, the Deborah Elizabeth Espy story. It is a really fascinating story. Espy was a 19-year-old college student who died the same month as Olson, and in Niceville, the town Niceville, Florida. So it's an actual real place. And so yeah, I've been working really closely with the Espy family. I've had communication with investigators on the case and lots of other people. And it's different case in that it's a closed case, and so there's an abundance of information, and so it's going to be a little different type of story where the outcome is known in this case, but the more I kind of dig into it, and you've helped me with some of this as well, the more I dig into this, I've learned that with all these cases, and you know this from all the cases you're covering, you can really look at any case, and if you look at it really closely enough, you're going to find a lot of odd people and a lot of odd circumstances and things. But yeah, and it's a very humbling experience to work on this book, of lots of good people I'm working with on that as well, just like this one. And I do hope with this book, with A Murder on Campus, if you are someone who has information, we're 53 years in, we're a year post publication, more than a year post publication of our book, but we are still working on it. We were talking to someone last night. We are still trying to put this together. And I think an ultimate plan would be to eventually donate a lot of these materials to UNC-Asheville in the future and create a kind of a repository history of this case that anybody in the future who wanted to look into it would be able to. But if you have any role that you're able to play in that, maybe it was someone in your family who was with the Asheville Police Department at the time. Maybe you were one of those students who was in the botanical gardens that day. We are interested in your perspective, both big and small, no matter how remote and removed you feel like you might be from the direct circumstances of the murder.
Well said. And how can people get in touch with you?
Easiest way, there you go, Brian Santana, author. So I went on today and did a little updating, so that the website is up to date now. And also at True Crime Professor. Feel free to DM me, follow me, and I will keep you abreast of whatever it is that I am working on, which will be that Espy book and always this case and stuff surrounding this book for the near future.
All right. Well, if you want to support me, like we said, you can get a copy of our book, A Murder on Campus, The Professor, the Cop, in North Carolina's Most Notorious Cold Case. That's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kindle, Audible, anywhere where you can get a book. You can also like and subscribe to Santana True Crime. And if you would like to get in contact with me, you can find me on Instagram at Santana True Crime, as well as other social medias. It's always going to be Santana True Crime. Brian, thank you so much for coming. Look forward to talking to you again about this case. And again, if you've got information, please come forward. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you again, and good night.